Tyler School of Art, Temple University. I'm also going to show you all the work from my BFA show. So to graduate with the Bachelor of Fine Arts from Tyler, you have to make a lot of pieces of artwork, install them in a gallery, and have an opening night. And all the work is on display for a good couple days, just as a professional artist might do. And so this is the show card for my BFA show. So I've got 5 little snapshots of the kind of work that people would see if they came to my show. And so this show was in May of 2011. I was in undergrad at Tyler from 2006 to 2011. I did 5 years because the extra year was for getting a teaching certification. But yeah, so we'll start off talking about my BFA show, as that's really kind of the culmination of all my work as an undergrad. So here's a short video showing just the layout of my show. I had a good portion of the gallery set aside to myself. So on the left side there is a projection of an experimental film that I made. Against the wall here I've got a set of 2 busts. So they were life casted from me using alginate and plaster. So that's my face, my head, and my shoulders and everything. And then I cast hydrocal plaster into them, and also wax and other different materials. And then I carved into the bust itself. I carved little rooms in there and put miniatures that were lit from inside. Those were pretty cool. I like those. So there's a set of 2 of those. And then back against the wall there's a cast piece that I did that's all plaster. I was casting the space between a couple that I knew, because that is kind of a more conceptual type piece. And then over on the wall we have a portrait of Jesus, actually, which I did on a piece of foam core, a piece of insulation foam that's wrapped in canvas, and then I made the portrait with straight pins, as in like sewing straight pins. So it's sort of like a pointillist thing. So we'll look at that. And then there's also a book on the one wall that I did. It was a printmaking project. We had to take the same plate and alter it, make a print, alter it again, make a print. And so I made an accordion book out of it. I also had a set of miniature vessels that I made. And then the last piece is a sort of an ode to Picasso. He did a similar piece where it was a bull, basically, that he had made out of a bike seat and some handlebars. So this is made out of all kinds of things that I found while I was abroad in Rome. So it's an elephant head made out of assembled pieces. So here we go. Yes, so here's the projection of the film. So I'd never really worked in video before, and so this was a very experimental kind of idea that I had, where I suspended the camera above the floor, where I had black plastic bags, Christmas lights, and then some grocery bags, and I laid down on the floor and I breathed into the bags and then sucked the air back out, and then breathed back into them, then sucked the air back out, and then I did my first attempt at some kind of a composite, and duplicated the lung, so I've got lungs on both sides, and then the heart in the center. So yeah, so that was kind of a fun project to do, and it's still one of the things from my undergrad experience that is my favorite, one of my favorite pieces that I did. And it was totally this crazy idea that was in my head, but I really enjoyed it. And it was supposed to reference a time in my life when I was having some heart problems, health problems in general, but one of them was my heart had slowed down to half the rate that it should have been, basically. And so that's why the heart in this video is beating much more slowly than it should be, basically. And so the final presentation of this film, it was projected onto me. But for the purposes of the BFA show, I just had it projected onto the wall. So next we've got, so there's the projection on the wall. My whole area is supposed to be seen with much more dim lighting because most of the things are lit from inside. But we've got the first bust here right next to the projection. So that's not a great picture of it. I can't seem to find a good well-lit picture from the front. But anyway, so this is the first bust. And so with the lights off, this is what it looks like. So that face is my face cast in wax. So I took a mold making class where we cast our heads. We had our whole heads cast. And so I already had a mold of my face. And so I just cast some clear wax into that to make basically a mask sort of my face that I could light up from inside. And so this bust, the shoulders and everything are cast in hydrocal plaster, which is a finer quality of plaster. It's almost like the porcelain of plaster. It's just a nicer, finer quality, and it picks up things like skin texture and things really well. And so, like I said, these busts, they have little holes in them, and then they have little scenes inside, little miniature scenes inside. So you can see in this one, you've got a tree, and you'll see there's like a street light there as well. So here's a closer look up at the tree, which is just made of sticks and paper and string. So yeah, there's that. And then everything here was lit from the inside. So that's the sort of like gravel and rocks and things that the tree is sort of planted in. Here's a closer look. I didn't have the best camera at the time, so this is not very HD, but this is a closer look at the wax cast of my face. And so coming around the right side of the bust, you can see there's some paper making the transition between what is the skull and the face itself. So coming around, and you see in the skull, we've got a little bird cage here, which doesn't have a bird in it, just an open bird cage, just made out of paper mostly. I really enjoy working with paper. So yeah, there's a closer up image of the bird cage that's inside the head, has a little perch on it. But the bird cage is open, as in like the bird has flown out. And that's what I decided to put in the head. The head itself, that skull type texture, that's actually just tracing paper that I've kind of paper machéed. And then I kind of intentionally broke it apart so that I could staple it back together. I really like that aesthetic. And so looking back down at the back here, you can see that the bird cage that we were just looking at is up here. And so down on the back here, where the spine should be, we have a street light, which is lit obviously from inside, across from the tree that's there in the front. And so there's a closer look at the street light, which is also made of paper, lit from inside. So to light the whole thing, I mostly just use Christmas lights, like string lights. And so I had one of the lights going up the pole, the stick part of the street light, and coming out the top. So yeah, I got some pretty cute, nice pictures of that going on in here, the tree and the street light. Give a nice look. And so back here on the left shoulder blade of this first bust, we have, oh, okay. Well, here's a little better image of some of the miniatures that were in that piece. So you can see them up close and in a little better lighting. Yeah. But anyway, in this left shoulder blade here, we have a little scene with a little boat. A boat that's it's supposed to be stuck in a field of grass, and the grass just happens to be made out of pages from a book. But yeah, so that's just a little scene in there. All the little scenes have like a symbolic meaning to me personally, but I don't know. My thing with art has always been that like many of the pieces have meaning to me, but that kind of stays with me, and I like them to be open to other people's interpretation. So other people might see different meanings in it, and that's perfectly fine. That's awesome. I don't necessarily have to tell people what it means to me. That's just kind of what I've came to as an artist. That's kind of how I view things. So again, this is all just paper. I figured out a nice way using oil pastels to mimic the look of wood on paper. So yeah. And so there's the wax head again from the other side, and yes, from the other corner, from the other shoulder here. So you've got the skull and the front of the head. So yeah, so here's the projection and everything in the dark, which is nice. And so just to look back at where we are in the whole setup, next we're going to be looking at this cast back here, which I put together, and then we'll see the second bust, and there's some other things around the corner. So let's look at the cast. So this was kind of a more conceptual piece. I wanted to cast the space between a couple that I knew. Obviously there's all kinds of like symbolic things about making the space between two people physical while taking away the people themselves. And so the process for making this was really was very long, and so basically I did life casts of both people, just their chests and their thighs, with alginate, and then a plaster mother mold on top of that. So I had the negatives. So I had negatives of both of their bodies. And then I used those negatives to make positives, which were also in plaster, because alginate is wonderful for picking up skin texture and all those kind of things, but it doesn't last. You can't get more than 1 or 2 casts out of alginate, and anyway, I wanted the final to be a negative. So I had to take the alginate negative, make a positive, so that I could make another negative, which would be the final negatives. And then I basically attached those together into one solid piece. So, and then displayed it on a bed. So yes, it was a very long process, but I don't know, I was a sculpture major, and a lot of the other sculpture majors were very conceptual as well, and this was the only piece by me that they actually really liked, because the conceptual part of it. But so, yeah, so the cast itself is a negative of both people, so it's really as if you had taken those two people away, and this is what was left between them. So, there's me working on it. And then eventually, once I broke down the whole show, I had to break the thing in half because it was too heavy. It was solid plaster, so you really can't lift it. I brought it in separate pieces and had to assemble it there on site, and so I had to take it apart to take it down. So moving on, next we have the second bust, which is over here. So here's a good front picture in lighting of the second bust. This one has more of a paper face, and it has a we'll see there's a dead bird actually here in where the heart would be. So that's the face, which the way that it lit up at night was pretty nice. There's from the side again that jar with the dead bird in it. You can take your own meaning from that the heart is replaced by a dead bird. But here's a nice view of the degree of detail you can get from a life cast with alginate, and then casting in hydrocal plaster is ridiculous. Like you can get pores, individual pores on someone's skin. It's crazy. So these are my lips, like captured in perfect detail. It's crazy. Life casting is awesome. And so here's the bust when the lights are off and it's lit up. So you've got somehow the face started doing this gorgeous rainbow sort of thing. I think partly because the bird is lit with a very cool light, whereas the rest of it was lit with a very warm light, and so you've got a transition going on between the reflection of the cool light and the warm light coming from the skull. But yeah, so in the throat there were 3 little tubes that had dirt and rocks and things. There was more symbolic meaning to that. Obviously, there it is lit up. We keep coming back to this guy. So here's a close-up of that bird. It is a real dead bird. I had a studio mate at the time that was really into collecting dead birds, which worked out pretty well for me because that's what I wanted to have in this cast here. So it was a finch, a dead finch, that I had in there. So again, we've got the skull made out of the tracing paper. This one I decided to sew back together with just thread. So it kind of harkens back to the other bust. You've got some similarities there. Yeah, so that's the skull. Here's the back of the second bust in light. So you've got 3 different alcoves there. And so this is it lit up. So we've got, so in place of the spine, I have a little metal, it's a steel spiral staircase intentionally placed there in place of the spine. And so looking at the right shoulder blade of this bust, we have a little room in there where the wallpaper's kind of coming off the walls, and there's a rocking chair that I made out of paper. I really like that little scene. It's kind of fun. Again, this was me returning to making miniatures, which was something that I did as a kid, and I thought, I kind of left that behind me or whatever. High school, I got into stop motion stuff, and then to find myself returning to miniature just kind of said something to me that like maybe this was what I was supposed to do. I was given the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do for this BFA show, and I chose to make the kind of work that I did, even when the people beside me, all the other sculpture majors, were making very conceptual stuff that was not very, handiwork kind of, not saying that there wasn't handiwork, but like all my stuff was really intricate and really, miniatures and like all these symbolisms and personal whereas some of the other sculpture majors were just like, some of them were kind of laying a couple objects on top of each other, and then we'd give each other a critique for 45 minutes about it, which was kind of frustrating, but this is the kind of work that I made. So anyway, so in place of the spine, we've got this steel spiral staircase that I put together. So that's a little bit of metal work on my part. You've got some, if you get the right angle here, you've got some like godly like light coming down, which is cute. So yeah, so this is the back of the bust. Moving on to the left shoulder blade, we just have a lamp without a shade in there, just a tiny little room with a lamp. And then coming back around to the left side of the bust, there's the bird again and the head. Another look at the head there. But yeah, next door to the second bust, there's this Pointillist, really, portrait of Jesus that I did with straight pins, somewhere around 10,000 straight pins, something like that. And so it was kind of an ode to pointillism, but at the same time being three-dimensional. So each pin was put in, and then I made some a higher, sticking out further, and other ones flush against the surface of the canvas. So yeah. So here's just a picture from the side of some of those pins. I got some pretty cool shots of the pins from the side. So this is looking up from his jawline, basically. This is his jawline right here. This is his hair. We're looking up, and you can see all the pins are at varying heights. And so it's nice when you come around the side. There's a point at which the image kind of dissolves, and coming back around where it kind of comes together again. It's kind of a cool effect. This is his shirt, basically, how his shirt was put together. This is all of his hair. And then again, some really nice close-up images of all those pins. It's hard to really do this piece justice unless you're there in person. It had a really crazy effect, the way that I got the lighting going. It really kind of popped in a way that it doesn't seem to in photographs. But yeah, coming back around with my show here, I've got a book here that was made, that was a printmaking project. So we'll see that in a second. These are miniature vessels that I made out of doll hair, and then I've got an assemblage here that we'll talk about as well. So here's the book. So again, this was a printmaking project. It was an intaglio project, so working on a copper plate. So this was a dry point etching, so I didn't use any acid with this. This was just dry point. So copper is soft enough that you can actually get a sharp implement and draw in size a drawing into it. And so the idea with this project was to use the same plate to make an image on the plate once, print that, make more changes to the plate, print that, and then go through the whole process and end up with 6 of them. And so it ends up being a metamorphosis. And so this also has meaning that I don't need to necessarily tell other people about, but it had to do with a friend of mine that passed away during school at that time, and how he kind of became, well, he was standing in a field with a stormy sky, and then he kind of became a lighthouse for me in a way. But anyway, so I made these 6 prints and then put them into an accordion book, and then that was on display at my show. Here's another picture of the same book, just showing the way that it fastens around front, which is kind of nice. So these are the miniature vessels that I made just out of doll hair and thread. It's just a little fun. It's a little off-loom fibers technique. So again, me returning to miniatures. I just enjoy them, I guess. There's another angle on them. So it's just doll hair and thread. It's a coiling technique. Yep. And then this is the last piece at my BFA show. So this was something that I made when I was a semester abroad in Rome. It's an ode to Picasso's piece that was a bike seat and bicycle handlebars that was supposed to be a bull. So this is kind of a similar idea. I found a bike seat while I was in Rome, which looked a lot like eyes when it was upside down, and it had that pole on it, which looked like an elephant's trunk. And then I got 2 handles from some umbrellas, because there are umbrellas all over Rome. And I found a couple hubcaps that had been discarded, and then these are stroller wheels from like a baby stroller that I cut open and put there. So it's an assemblage intended to look like an elephant's head, basically. So that was something new for me, doing an assemblage of things that I'd found, basically found objects. And then it had a little nameplate that I etched on. It was like a little plate that I had etched that says Elephas Maximus. So it's just like for like a hunter that might have a trophy head on his wall. I was trying to make it like that. So yeah, that was the end of my BFA show. So you've got, this is the bird cage that was in the one head. This was the staircase that was in place of the spine of one of them. This is the skull of the second bust. And then there are the pins of the Jesus and the street light with the tree. So we can look at the rest of some other highlights of my undergrad work at Tyler School of Art. So here are some drawings that I had. We definitely had figure drawing classes, so there are some little like 5-minute sketches here. This was a thing that I did in Rome. I believe there was a statue that I was working off of. And then this guy over here, this one on the left, this is a drawing that I was doing on a lithography plate with an oil-based pencil. So this was actually of a statue that's it's like halfway up the Vatican. When you go halfway up the Vatican, you can see there's a sculpture of St. Michael, and this was kind of looking up at that sculpture. So I ended up doing a drawing of him on a lithography plate for a litho class that I took a printmaking class as soon as I got back from Rome, so I did all kinds of printmaking in that class, which was really fun. So drawing, I've got another figure study right here. We had to do a figure study, or we had to do a study of our ears, and then I had a drawing here of a friend that I did. And so printmaking, like I talked about, this is a lithograph piece that I have from Rome. Again, this is halfway up the Vatican. You get to sort of a platform, and you can see the two domes there. So that's a Vatican piece. Here's just a relief linoleum cut of a robot who finds a heart, but he doesn't understand that it's fragile, and so he accidentally crushes it. I think I called it system error or something like that, something corny. Again, that book is a good example of printmaking. So all of the types of printmaking I've done. So relief printmaking, screen printing, which is this guy here. This is relief on a wood block. The robot one was a relief on linoleum. This is intaglio. So yeah, I've done all and lithography. So yeah, I've done all 4 major types of printmaking. These are some screen printing is always really fun. And then this was just a book I made with some woodcut relief prints. I made a number of books at Tyler School of Art. That was always fun. This is the book that I made out of playing cards. So even the case from the playing cards became the case for the book. And then the book itself was about memory loss and Alzheimer's. Like the whole story was, the whole concept behind it was basically about that. Ceramics, I did a good deal of ceramics. So this was my first raku piece that I did, raku firing. You can get like amazing textures and stuff with raku. We had to make a totem pole at one point, so I made all these 3 different pieces, some of which most of them were raku, and I left some bits unglazed so that they would get this kind of burnt matte black sort of effect in contrast to the raku glazes. We had to do a set of vessels, and so I decided to do a set of bowls that actually sit on their side, sort of the way that like a cornucopia works. And so I had a whole set of those guys. And then this was a little sculpture that I made. It was 2 hands, which form kind of a prison over top of this figure. And it was sort of a metaphor for depression. I did some metals work as an undergrad, just large form metals. So like welding, I did like MIG and TIG welding. I don't think I ever got around to doing stick welding. Did some tack welding, and cutting metal and all these kinds of things. So I made this little like comet type sculpture thing that had this, it had little things nesting inside of other things. So that was fun. Fibers, I did a good amount of. I was kind of all over the place really at Tyler School of Art, partly because of the whole getting a teaching certification. They want you to have experience in all the different types in case you should happen to go teach that. Fibers I enjoyed a lot. So you can etch fabric. If you get a fabric that's a blend of two different types of fibers, you can get this etching chemical, which is just a type of acid that eats one of those types of fibers. And so you can basically do a drawing on fabric by using this chemical to eat away one of those fabrics. So I think I got this is a shirt that I got that was like half polyester, half rayon, something like that. And then I think the chemical ate the polyester but left the rayon, something like that. So you end up with like a drawing, basically. And then I lit it from behind. So I decided a Gothic cathedral might be kind of fun to do an etching in. This is a short scarf that I made for my mom on a loom, doing some loom weaving, which is fun. We had a project where we had to do something with forearms and hands. So I did a cast of one of my hands and played around with hot wax. And then the other one I just did some like latch hooking kind of thing on. For one project, we had to do an installation, and there was this kind of silly sculpture on campus of like this naked woman on top of a fish. And so for my installation idea, I just decided to clothe them. I put a dress on her, and I put him in like a little suit, and so now it's like Dancing with the Stars. So that was interesting in that, like, trying to cut a dress and to fit it onto a body that obviously cannot come off of the fish, you know, like tailoring it around the body in a way. Like, that was a little bit challenging, but it was fun. So another fibers, I took an off-loom fibers techniques class, so we were doing all kinds of cool stuff, playing with different materials. For this assignment, we had to make a lattice structure. That was the only rule. And so I ended up actually making sort of like twine out of pine needles. I got pine needles and I wrapped them with thread and coated them in polyurethane, and then just built them up in a lattice structure, which was pretty cool. I would say. I've done a little bit of photography here and there, mostly digital. I haven't done any processing of physical film, just like digital stuff. So this was in Hawaii. This was just at a train station. This was a sort of a self-portrait that I installed in a gallery. I did some white stitching on it and then installed it in a gallery. And then this is a shot from Rome when I was in Rome for the semester. So I've done some light photo manipulation, but not like really involved stuff. But yeah, so dabbled in photography a little bit. Mold making, I wish I still had images of all the different molds that I made, because I took a mold making tech class that was a really big deal that I've since used all the methods from. For the one project I made, I did a little casting of this little Buddha character, so I ended up casting him in lollipops, crayons, and then also wax, which I set up with some lighting so that it would on a tree on campus, so it was lit up at night. And so I did some sand casting when I was doing glass blowing. You can use this special type of sand to make a one-sided mold, and then you can drop hot glass into it and it will take on that form. The only problem is you get a somewhat sandy texture, and some of this sand is a little bit difficult to take off. But yeah, so mold making wise, I worked with plaster, ultracal. I cast life casts. I did those in hydrocal and wax. I worked with Mold Max 30, which is from Smooth On, to do a silicone mold with a plaster mother mold over top of it. I did a good deal of mold making, and then of course I did the cast that was in the show, that piece as well. This was a mixed media piece that I did with some latex gloves. I just made a chandelier out of them, and I built it on the frame from a miniature umbrella. This was also a good lesson in latex, which was helpful to me now in my master's studies, because this lasted perhaps a year and a half before all the rubber gloves dried up and crumbled into powder, basically. Latex does not have a long lifespan, especially in this form, especially something thin like a latex glove does not last longer than a year and a half, 2 years. It literally just crumbles into dust. So that was interesting. That was good. A good lesson for me to make me a little bit more wary of latex. I've really kind of fallen in love with latex since coming to grad school. But that is a truth of latex. Even foam latex will break down over time. But yeah, and then obviously mixed, I've got the assemblage that I talked about. This is a cake sculpture I made for a friend. It's his favorite type of beer, actually, but it is entirely made out of cake. And there are little pieces of cardboard in here so you can separate it into different slices. There's a dowel going down to kind of keep it all together. And so it is a dark chocolate Guinness cake with Irish cream icing, and then the label and everything, these are all homemade fondant that I used like decorating icings and things on. So it was about 18 inches in height, a foot and a half in height. Yeah, so I had never really worked in cake before, but it definitely had its own challenges. Cake is an interesting thing to have to do a sculpture with. In terms of glass blowing, I did some glass blowing as an undergrad. That was really fun. Here's just some solid work that I did. So these are basically just like paperweights. To do any hollow work, you have to have a partner with you, but solid work you can really kind of do on your own. So glass blowing, here's some hollow work. This glass I'm really happy with. So it's like a full size drinking glass, and then it has a spiral of captured bubbles up the walls. That was pretty fun and cool to make. This is just a practice making different types of shapes with the jacks, which are a tool that you use when you're glass blowing. Here's some special effect type glass blowing things. I had this foil that I didn't even know what type of metal it was, and I didn't know what would happen, so I just rolled it up into hot glass, and it turned out making everything blue. So that was fun. This bubbly kind of scenario is what you get when you roll hot glass with baking soda and then gather another layer of hot glass on top of it. You end up with these crazy bubbles. So I made a couple vessels like this for my mom to use as like a little, put your little votive candle in there. This is another paperweight. It has a captured bubble of air in there. And then if you take hot glass and you dump it in water, you get this really cool crackle effect on the surface. So that's just a little paperweight I made. This is a special effect you can get when you put steel wool into hot glass. So we had a long rod of glass that we rolled up in steel wool and then sliced off little discs. And then I picked up those little discs onto a wad of hot glass. And so that's how you end up with this kind of a texture here. So all the little black bits are actually just steel wool. And then we had to do a little bit of cold working as glass blowing people. So this is sort of a cheap trick over here, but I made a set of drinking glasses out of Corona bottles, so you can just cut them with a saw and then sand them on various sanding discs. This was my one assignment, to do some cold working with glass, so I made different vessels and then cut them up and sanded them and reassembled them to hold different flowers and things. And that's really the end of the work that I had as an undergrad at Tyler School of Art. So